Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer, and today we're going to have another fantastic and incredible episode for you guys. So sit back and enjoy. So today, the first topic we're going to be discussing is peace in Ukraine. We've got two questions about this from both Nitro and New England Refugee, asking me about the unveiled 28-point plan that was issued by the Trump administration. Trump says it's not his final offer, but it is a framework for which to make peace for. And so what are my thoughts on this? Well, obviously when the peace plan came out, Ukraine and Europe complained about it, and a lot of Republican and Democratic lawmakers complained about it, but it's the best possible deal you can imagine. Their main complaints are, it's like, we're not giving enough security guarantee to Ukraine. We're not allowing them to join NATO. We're limiting their armed forces to 600,000, which right now it's around 800,000. So it's not that much of a paradigm. This isn't quite, what we imposed on Germany with the Treaty of Versailles when it went from this massive military power to being limited to 100,000 soldiers, and their whole Navy and Air Force were completely wiped out. So this isn't Versailles. It's just limiting it to that. I mean, they can negotiate over that number. That's probably one of the things they can negotiate. Main thing is that they're not allowed to join NATO. It's going to be ironclad guarantee that they're not joining NATO, but it does offer that there's going to be some security guarantee, which has been suggested from the peace talks they had with Putin in Alaska a few months ago, that they'll talk that it could be a European guarantee, that they could form their own security pact, which it seems that Trump wants to abandon NATO and allow Europe to take care of its own security. I don't know how that will work. But then, within a European Sans America NATO type organization, they could give security guarantees to Ukraine. But it's not guaranteed in there. It allows for that possibility, just says they can't join NATO. So they don't like that. And then the other thing is that it gives over all these territories that they don't really control over to Russia. Now, there's some territory that they still control, but they're rapidly losing. Like Donetsk is the primary issue. They're going to give all of Lugansk and Donetsk and Crimea, that's going to be given to Russia. I mean, Russia's completely controlled Crimea since early 2014 for nearly 12 years. So there's no question that they can take back Crimea. Lugansk, Russia pretty much has entire control over, so that doesn't appear to be much of a sticking point. It's primarily Donetsk, which they're rapidly losing ground. So they're like, well, they don't control it. Well, we'll wait like 6 months, and they pretty much will have total control over it because Ukraine can't stop their recent offenses. They keep losing ground in that territory. Now, it does offer also more territory than previous discussions where they would just get Donetsk and Luhansk and then Crimea. They don't get all, because if you guys remember in 2022, Russia announced that it had annexed 4 additional oblasts: Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia. I'm probably mispronouncing it, but you guys can understand. And then Kherson. They lost more control of Kherson, I think, after the annexation because they abandoned the city, Kherson, the city, and then they had a retreat beyond it due to a Ukrainian offensive, and they don't have total control over those regions. It's like roughly half or a third. Now, instead of saying that they are kicking them out, they're leaving the territory, the point of contact that they have in those territories, Russia will maintain control over. While the points of territory that Ukraine has, they'll maintain control over. It's different from Donetsk, where the territory that Ukraine still controls, it's going to give up to Russia, while in Zaporizhia and Kherson, Ukraine will still control the territory they have. So those two oblasts will just be split along Russian and Ukrainian lines, which might be more than the territorial losses is more than Ukraine and a lot of its allies want to give up, but they're not going to take back this territory. So I think that's a decent peace deal. That's still somewhat of a setback for Russia because they announced they had annexed 2 additional oblasts. Instead, they get, at most half of those oblasts. So, this is not quite getting what they all want. Also, Trump wants some financial guarantees from Ukraine and get to paid for the peace deal in typical Trump fashion. So I think it's a good peace deal. I don't give a shit about like this stuff. There's some people who are even on the right is like, we got to deal a huge loss to the Moscow Beijing access. I don't give a shit about like first off, like Russia did not get what it wanted out of this war. It wanted to topple the government in Ukraine and put a friendlier government there, and that they would once again return at least most of Ukraine to its sphere. Maybe there would have been, a secession in the part of Western Ukraine from the rest of Ukraine, but they would have gotten control of Kiev. We're calling it Kiev here. We're not going and calling it Kiev. Kiev, and most of the, at least half of the country would have been within the Russian sphere. Maybe the country would have been split up, or maybe they got half of it, or they would have gotten, significant chunks. Just getting what they have now is a tremendous setback from. Well, I wouldn't say it's a tremendous setback, but it's far less than they expected when they invaded Ukraine. They sent troops down to Kiev in order to take Kiev and place a friendlier government there, or a puppet government, as you will. They're not getting that, and they're getting far less territory than they try to get. They're not getting Kharkov or Kharkiv. They're not getting even the entirety of those two oblasts that they claim they annexed. They were planning to get a whole lot more than four oblasts. They were trying to get, at least a third of the country. They're not getting a third of the country. And even the goal when they got was to take the entire country and bring it back into the Russian sphere. Maybe preferably it wasn't going to be an annexation, even though I think it would have recognized that they would have taken back Crimea and maybe Donetsk and Luhansk to Russia, but then they would have left the entire, intact, but it would have been under a friendlier government. That didn't happen. So the war did not go as well as Russia hoped it would. And they suffered significant losses. A lot of their military image has been undermined by this war. I mean, they've developed it there. It shows that they are like a legit, they're willing to take a lot of casualties, which not a lot of developed countries are willing to take the amount of casualties that Ukraine and Russia has. But, this was not this huge victory for Russia. And even this peace plan is not as massive a victory as they would have hoped for when they initiated the invasion in 2022. But so you do deal, even if you think, and I'm not that big of a Russia fan. I think most of the right has given up on a lot of our Russia illusions. They were shown that they were not as strong as we thought they were. They're much more tied in with the third world and the non-West. It's kind of a basket case of a country. They're not the great savior of white civilization or whatever. We've understood that. But at the same time, I don't think, we really need to promise the unrealistic. Like, Ukraine is not going to take back that territory. It doesn't have the ability to. It's been proven that they can't take back the territory. And it is bad for Ukraine for them to lose their entire fighting age male population in this war. So it's necessary to end it as soon as possible. And I think so I support any peace deal they can get. I think this provides an outline for a peace deal. I think they'll change it, like the military size restrictions. They'll probably maybe forego I think there's it's supposed to be in the Ukraine constitution that they'll never join NATO. They'll probably take that out. There's some other things. Maybe they'll dispute over, Zaporizhia and Kherson, which territory they have there. We'll see. It's an offering. It's an opening offer, which they can negotiate around. I think the basic framework is the best you're going to get. I think it's very dumb for people to demand things that are just not going to happen. And this is the best deal that any side can get. Ukraine can demand some more concessions and to change it, but I think the basic framework is good. I do think we're on some. Nitro asked if we're on the path to a peace plan. I think we are. I think we're getting closer to this. You finally have a formal offer. You finally have a framework worked out. You also have America pressuring Zelensky to take the deal. There's also elements within Ukraine that the thing with Zelensky doesn't want to take the deal is that it takes the deal, he's dead. I mean, literally probably dead because they'll probably have a coup. The thing is that I've talked to, if you guys remember Erkutanian, he's still around on Twitter. We had him on a bunch of podcasts, but he's under a different name, private account. But, I've talked to him about this, and he says that even if you have like an Azov involved coup, that they may be more willing to take the deal because they have the clout and the stature to take that deal and for people to accept it. And also they know that popular support for the war is rapidly declining. So they would take the deal and just take power instead. And then rule, I guess, as an Azov state. So that might be the best way to do is that we have a military coup, that it's like the hardliners, then the hardliners actually accept the deal. Because then they get total power, and it's like, whatever. That would probably be in our interest for that to happen. But Zelensky, it's very tough for Zelensky to take it because it's a very likely he faces a coup if he takes the deal. The problem or the thing is that whoever coups him may be more inclined to take the deal if they have the stature and the reputation to say, we fought on the front lines, we bled, and we sacrificed while the politicians did nothing. And, they make that pitch to the people that we're going to make a peace deal now, but it's not going to be permanent. They might be able to sell it to Ukraine and to their own people. So I think we're getting closer. I think it's not as far away of a possibility as you would have thought, earlier this year when Trump tried to do negotiations and they failed. I think we are getting closer. We're getting step by step closer to it. I think in the fact that they see this peace deal there, it's outlined. America basically supports it. It creates the momentum to have that peace deal. But we'll see. European diplomats are saying we don't support it. Well, they're not going to take up the slack for if America abandons Ukraine. And we are pressuring Ukraine to take this deal. And I do think, it might take a while or a few more months for it, but I do think we'll finally have a peace deal by the midterms. And so I think that's a good thing. In spite of, even though we no longer, I 3 years ago was one of the first people to say, like, look, this war doesn't really, this war, whoever wins or loses, does not have that much of a direct effect on the Western right as people thought. Like, Russia, it's not really our friend. I don't think we should have this hostile, like, viewing them as our global enemy, but they're not really like our ally or the savior of Western civilization. They are in a lot of the areas that they have taken over, they're repopulating it with Central Asians, even though, you're going to have Russian posters like, that's fake news. But I mean, they show Mariupol and it's full of Central Asians now. It's full of people from the Caucasus. So, they're going to need to find some type of population to populate those areas. And they're just going to get migrants from there. And then Ukraine also has its obvious problems too, and they're probably going to bring migrants as well. Well, depending on who controls the government, that both sides are not really ideal. There's obviously far right elements on both sides, but it's just not our fight. And I think the main concern is that you have all these Europeans fighting and dying over some, slag heap is not really a very white-pilling thought. And I think it's necessary to end the war to stop the bloodshed. I think that's all it really cares about. I think a lot of people supported Russia at the beginning. Even I was into this, is that it was necessary to hit back at the global American empire, the globalist American empire, which people don't use GAE anymore, gay anymore. People got very mad if you use gay. They're like, it's something else. It's Zog. You can't say gay. And so there was all these people who were mad about that term, but people were into that because it's, we had Biden, we had peak woke. It was like, wow, Russia is finally dealing a blow to our political enemies domestically, but then they didn't really deal that blow. And it doesn't really matter to, how the world is operated on our side if they control these completely devastated areas of Ukraine. So, I think it's the most important thing for us is to stop blowing all this money on Ukraine and to stop the bloodshed. And that's why I hope for a peace deal. Even if you think that Russia needed a bloody nose because it's too aggressive, and they do a lot of tawdry things. They've been sending migrants into Europe through Finland and through their ally Belarus. And it's so they're willing to do these. And as I said, they're trying to repopulate their areas that they control of Ukraine because they've been heavily depopulated with non-whites. It happens. Or they're not really our friend. They're not really our guy. Putin is an interesting leader. There's admirable traits about him, but he's not our grand hero. But even if you wanted to give him a bloody nose because you think he's a bad guy, well, this war accomplished that. They're not getting what they wanted out of this war, and so everyone comes away with a victory of a sorts, except for Ukraine. I think except for Ukraine. It's necessary for the end of war, and I think it's also best for Europe for this war to end. Even though they're so stupid, the Europeans, they're so brainwashed that they'll continue to destroy their economy and undermine their own interests by continuing this war. This war makes them completely dependent on America, screws up their economy, waste all this military hardware that they can't easily replace on this stupid conflict, but they just continue on with it no matter what. So that's my thoughts. I'm optimistic about a peace deal. I think it's in our interest. We've spent enough money on Ukraine, and to stop all the money spending is a win, and to stop the bloodshed is a massive win. We want peace on Earth, or peace in Europe, and too many have died already, and to end the bloodshed is a noble service. So we hope the peace plan is accepted in some form. All I really care is about some peace plan. I think, Ukraine's going to have to acknowledge they're going to give up territory, and they can't just immediately join NATO. So there's going to be something along those lines. So that is my answers to those questions. New England Refugee has more questions. Well, this week I'm going to be traveling for the holiday. So Wednesday will likely not be a recorded episode. It might be, actually, but we're going to answer all mailbag questions submitted today, or submitted before today. If you did get any, if I answered your mailbag questions today, that means you probably shouldn't send any mailbag questions for Wednesday, and to try to limit your mailbag questions to just one for that day. So you guys... if you have two really good ones, send two good ones. Do not send three. I'm not gonna be a happy podcaster if you submit 3 questions this week for the mailbag. But in any case, we've got some more. We've got some great questions from Gillis Enjoyer. He's got 2 questions on on the same topic, but a different topic than we just discussed. He said, we're seeing a lot of negativity in the movement lately. Some of it is doomerism, but some of it is also logical, especially regarding the economy and our issues with voter turnout when Trump is not on the ballot. With all that in mind, what do you think are the actual reasons to be white-pilled about a Republican victory in 2028, if there are any at all? Given the problems I mentioned, our structural will be pretty challenging to fix. 2028 is a long ways away. After the 2022 midterms, it looked bleak for Republicans. It looked very bleak for Trump. It looked like he was going to face indictments. How is he going to be president from a jail cell? It looked pretty bad. I think the economy will bounce back. I think Democrats will also pick someone are likely to pick someone who's not going to do well in a general election. Newsom, if they pick Newsom, I'm skeptical they're going to pick Newsom, because Newsom is the villain of 80s, 90s, and 2000s comedies. He is Shooter McGavin. He is they all have our Bradley Cooper from Wedding Crashers. That's another character he's exactly like. They have all of the, there's this type of asshole that has always been in our comedies that we all are supposed to despise. And that guy is Gavin Newsom. And people are not going to, I think it's not going to carry well in a general election. Trump was Rodney Dangerfield, or the roguish anti-hero of comedies. He's vulgar, he's loud, he's rowdy, but he's standing up with the people against the uptight establishment. Newsom is the uptight establishment, but more of an asshole than they are. I think he's going to have problems in the general election. I mean, it's not like some ways I like that vibe is kind of funny, but I don't think a Patrick Bateman type character is going to be as electable as people think. And also, California is a basket case. I don't think he's going to have much to run on. There could also nominate a far left progressive, an AOC, a Ro Khanna. There's a lot of possibilities. Or they could go with Gretchen Whitmer, which I don't, on the flip side, from being a complete comedy movie asshole, the villain, like Gavin Newsom, you also have a complete bitch who would also be a comedy movie villain in Gretchen Whitmer. So I think there's those issues. I think Democrats, if you're looking for white pills, I don't think Democrats are going to solve their messaging problems and their identity problems by 2028. I think the economy will be in a better state. I think we'll be able to move beyond some of the things that are holding back Republicans at this moment. And there's just like a completely different world could be going on in 2028. If the economy is good in 2028, I think the chances of a Republican victory are high. Before COVID, Trump was going to win easily 2020. They're picking Biden. He was going to be senile. He was going to have to go campaign. The economy was going well. Democrats went all extreme woke, extreme left. They had problems. But then COVID happened and it scrambled things. I think it's in 2028, if the economy's humming, the Republicans can campaign on that, and Democrats are promising high taxation and massive economic disruption and just a lot of crazy stuff, and have a vicious primary that undermines the general election candidate. I think that it could be, Republicans could win. I don't think I don't think they're going to keep the House next year. They could. I mean, I give it like a 10%, 15%. That's a little too odd. I'll give it 20%. 20% chance they keep the House. But, that's expected for the party in power to lose the House. So it's not that big of a setback. But we'll see. 2028 will be a different election. We're far away from it. We're 3 years out, so a lot can change between now and then. Second question. It's undeniable there's been a cultural vibe shift against the right compared to a year ago. Do you think that we're still in a better position than we were at any prior point in the Trump era, though, from 2015 to 2023? I think the general culture is not as pro-Trump as it was right after he won, such as athletes doing the Trump dance, but we're still not seeing the kind of fever pitch 24/7 TDS pervading all forms of media. Yes, we're still in a better position than we were at any prior point in the Trump era. Absolutely. I think in some ways we might be better than in right after the election. We were a little too white-pilled at that time. And I think people began getting unrealistic expectations of what could happen and other things. So I think we're a bit better. The only thing is we're becoming a victim of our success is that people, they still have unrealistic expectations. Some people just have it. It's like when it comes with the Antifa stuff. It's like all these people expecting us to arrest like Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer for terrorism. I was like, this is not a realistic expectation. Okay, but people are demanding it and then getting blackpilled that the impossible isn't happening. But it's much easier to be a Trump supporter now than at any previous time. It's also much easier to produce right-wing content, find out right-wing content, and express right-wing views than any time in the recent history. More people believe in this stuff than any time in recent history, and some of that's why people are getting blackpilled by that. It's more of a cultural vibe shift, not so much against the right, but against Trump. But even there, the vibe shift, it's nowhere near it was in 2010s. They had a football player, it was a Lions player, I forget his name. People will remember it. He did the Trump dance. a few weeks ago. He had to apologize for it. But the fact that that players still want to do it, that's something that's a big change. They would have never considered that in, say, 2017, 2018. Even being seen as saying something nice about Trump was like, you're going to have to apologize for that. And no one would tolerate that. And you had all these athletes just going off on Trump 24/7. So, and entertainers as well. So it's way different than it was in the 2010s. You also don't have tax censorship. Even if there's a vibe shift, our views are almost too prevalent because I think some people are getting red pill overdoses and they can't handle it. But you don't have the text censorship at all. You don't have to worry that by being a Trump supporter or saying you believe in the great replacement that you have to get debanked. I know there's still some examples of that. Well, the debanking is more of a foreign problem, but you don't have to worry as much about getting censored. There's still some censorship. I mean, there was this British right-winger, Zoomer historian, I think is his name, who got censored, but that's a British guy. I think that was due to laws of the UK. And it was YouTube, and he was able to rally support on Twitter, which that didn't happen. When Stefan Molyneux got banned from YouTube, he then got banned from Twitter. So he was completely silenced. And Molyneux was not that radical a figure. So it's a much better vibe, much better culture, much better social framework we're dealing with right now than we were in the late 2010s, early 2020s. I just think is that people themselves are more black-pilled, but they're able to express their black pills and convey these views to a larger audience than they were in, say, 2018. And there's fewer consequences for radical views, which is a good thing, than there was in 2019, 2018. It's just that people are black-pilled right now. But we're not getting censored for it. And we're gaining more people interested in this stuff than we were at any other time. So, yes, I would say that it's still better than any other time period. 2020, late 2024, we might have been a little just... It's good to be white pill, but it was maybe, it wasn't going to last forever. But we still haven't seen the type of backlash that we had, say, in 2017. An example of that is in Charlottesville, man, people were nuts after that. People were absolutely nuts after that. I almost got fired just because of the Southern Poverty Law from Daily Caller because of Southern Poverty Law Center. Didn't like who I followed on Twitter and like who I had, hung out with before. Then I got, there was all these, actually conservative media just began firing people because they suspected they were all right. There was this massive protest in Boston against some like 12-person Proud Boy rally. And then there was like 100,000 people out there. So it's like no comparison to what we're seeing today, to what was like back then. The hysteria and, Stasi-like atmosphere is not here today. So it's still better than any other time period in recent history. Let's see. Pay-per-views got a question. He said, what percent of celebrities that praise Trump do you think do it because their celebrity career might be declining? They could use half the country backing them, or because they actually get the issues? An example I would use is Kid Rock versus Cristiano Ronaldo, who is arguably the biggest star in the world, treated like a god by Latinos and doesn't game age by meeting Trump. I don't think many of them. Maybe Nicki Minaj. Her career was in the past, but very few of them. They generally are into Trump. I don't think they're just celebrating Trump to gain a new audience. Some people might do that, but I think it's a very small number. Kid Rock has been conservative for a while. He generally likes Trump. He was liking Trump when there was a risk to do that in the 2010s. So I don't think very many of them are. I think maybe Nicki Minaj might be the only ones, but I think she's just really into the Nigerian issue and is fine with being pro-MAGA. But, her career, peak was in the past. So maybe maybe she's one of the few examples, but I think most of the celebrities, they generally like Trump. Armed Day Enjoyer has a question saying, is it fair to say many white working class people appear middle class at first glance, but their working class strengths show once you look deeper? Lauren Boebert, her background before Congress is working class, in my opinion, is the perfect example. There's a lot of, in my opinion, there. Family seems nice in pictures, yet she's a grandma before 40. I think that's a lot of people. Bourgeois middle class is the standard. And I think for a lot of Gen Xers and boomers, they could still maintain some bourgeois standards. Like, they put for the Christmas picture, they put on collared shirts, no visible tattoos there. The home looks like it's bourgeois domesticity bound, but, there's like problems there. I mean, neither her nor her husband went to college. They both had, run-ins with the law. She does have tattoos. I think her husband does, but I don't think they're visible in the family photo. They did have those guns there, but that's more of a signal to conservatives than to a working class thing. I mean, normal middle class people wouldn't do that. I mean, maybe if they're big hunters, they would do that, but normal middle class people wouldn't do that. I mean, Massey's family also did that, but that's because they're autistic and nerds, so that's why they got the guns. But no, there's some people who are like that. It's just that bourgeois standard, that old bourgeois respectability is the norm, and even working class people aspire to it. I think for the younger people, I mean, actually, Boebert isn't even in Gen X; she's a millennial. But I think for people under 35, and even people's Boebert's age, it's harder for them to maintain that. Like, they'll do a Christmas photo in, complete trash clothing, visible tattoos everywhere. There's not even an attempt at bourgeois domesticity. But I think for a certain class, Boebert, the fact she ran for Congress, the fact she presented herself as middle class seeming, she was an aspirant to that, which is shared by all Americans of a certain age. But I think that for younger ones, they don't even bother with the pretense. So it's more of an older thing. A lot of people try to attempt that, and also when people realize that they can't fully achieve bourgeois domesticity, that it really bothers them, and because they know that they're outside the norm and they're worried about falling into the ranks of the white trash. But I think for younger, under 30s, under 35, they don't even care. They're not even wear a collared shirt to church anymore. There was an older population, even poor folk, who would make sure to dress up for church, but younger people don't even bother doing that. So I think it's more of a generational thing on that front. K-Max asked, Tim Pool hosted a debate with Aram McIntyre and Joel Berry to discuss the woke right nonsense and disfying Nick Fuentes. Your view of the debate, if you saw it, and how much does it come down to supporting Israel for people like Joel Berry? I didn't watch the full thing. I watched some of it, so I can't speak about the whole thing. But on Joel Berry's point, it's not just Israel. It's this whole demand we stick to old guard conservatives. As a point that I made is that Israel is the point that they're using to attack the so-called woke right, online right, new right. But it's not just Israel that they want to limit discussion around. It's an entire package. They want to dispute, they want to get rid of non-interventionism. They want to go return back to neoconservative foreign policy, which doesn't just mean with Israel. It's also like maximum support for Ukraine and other stupid conflicts. They don't want any frank discussion of race and identity. They may be open to some immigration restriction, but they want conservatives to admit that immigration is a strength. Absolute support, even though I'm not that much have much of a problem with this one. It's like absolute support for the free market. Well, absolute support is a bit different. I think we should be pro free market, but not in the same way that like Paul Ryan and all those people, because they'd be so addicted to the free market that they're like, well, the free market says we need more immigration, and the free market says we should allow sports betting, and so, there should be some limits on that. But it's a whole thing that they want to discuss, and they want to return the right to its pre-Trump stage. and the only humor we allow is Babylon Bee's shitty jokes. So it's not just supporting Israel. It's a whole matter of rhetoric, ideas, and beliefs that they want to kick out, and they want to return conservatism to its old form that was discredited in 2016. And that's the point of Joel Berry. So I can't. I didn't watch the full thing. I watched a bunch of clips, but I don't have many other thoughts from the clips concerning that and other things. But that's my thoughts on it. So Max Zoid has a question saying, I believe the most clear-cut solution to good men scarcity would be to create clones of Scott Greer. I don't know about that. What are your thoughts on the ethics of cloning? I don't have strong thoughts on that. I'd have to think about that one. I don't think we're ever going to fully, like in the movies where it's like, oh, I've got a clone, and then the clone becomes like evil or something. There's a ton of movies like that. I don't think we're going to get to complete sci-fi levels on the ethics of cloning. I think it's very weird, though. It's like cloning an animal. I know people have done that stuff, but on the ethics side, I don't know. I just find it weird. So, but in terms of strong thoughts, no, I don't have much strong thoughts. But I do find it weird. I probably would say, based on all the sci-fi movies, maybe we should be reticent about going full bore with cloning. But that's really the only thoughts on how I have on it. Ken's got 2 questions. Why didn't they give you a podcast with Christopher Rufo? I don't know. I don't think they would give me a podcast with Christopher Rufo. So I don't know about that. Thoughts on Harmeet Dillon? She's doing a good job. I mean, it's probably the best person you'd expect running the Civil Rights Division. She is a serious lawyer. She's going to go out. She is going after anti-white discrimination on campuses and businesses. And she is going after the campus anti-Semitism stuff, but they're going to go after that no matter what. She's not using her office to go after minority grievances like they did in the past. So it's about as good as you can expect. But there's always a suspicious element about Harmeet. Harmeet is very hostile towards white identity. I know people who know her, and they said, like, she always say, like, the formative experience of her life was growing up in North Carolina, and all these kids would make fun of her for being Indian. And she grew up in like the 70s and 80s. So, this is when people didn't even see Indians at that time. And that was her formative experience of that. And that's always questionable. And she gets really upset at nativism from Americans. So, but what do you expect? She's Indian. I mean, it is what it is. But she's fine at the job she's at. She has some extremely questionable views that she broadcasts and advocates, but we didn't select her to be a political pundit. We selected her to run the Civil Rights Division, and from people I know, she's doing a okay job at it and focusing on what we care about. And it's probably the best version of the Civil Rights Division we've ever had at the Department of Justice, because it's always been terrible as we've had a Civil Rights Division, but now it's finally being used to defend whites, and defend our interests. Even though we might not be fans of the anti-free speech efforts, but who else is going to take that job? So I think she's fine at her job, but her political views, there's some suspect views she expresses. We'll go with New England refugees, other questions. LK Rurik hasn't submitted a question yet, so I don't know if we're going to end on him, but we're going to wait to see if he sends in one. But New England refugee says, it seems like the golden age of race science posting is done. Many don't even like eugenics anymore. Would you consider someone based if they aren't good on eugenics? People are just not into science. I mean, I find the science stuff boring, but I respect it as important, and it's necessary to believe this stuff. But people in general, like, they see science like, that's Reddit stuff. I don't like that. I just focus on vibes. And they hate science posting. They hate polling, unless the polling shows that, like, all young men are returning to Orthodox Church, or not even returning, but converting to Orthodoxy. They don't like polling. But eugenics, it's obvious that they would never like it. I mean, Alex Jones and the conspiracy theorist types have always been anti-eugenics. A lot of the traditionalist Catholics and other Christian conservatives have been always very opposed to eugenics, and conspiratorialism is very popular among our side. So it's not surprising that people are anti-eugenics, even though they try to say they're pro-eugenics, but it's not really the case. I would consider that a suspect thing if they're not at least open to the idea of eugenics. If they view eugenics as evil, then that definitely takes down their points on the key chart. So if you think of it, it's more if they just view it as evil. If they will use as a criticism of that they're eugenicists, like Josh Hawley does against tech people or to any of his enemies, and they wildly use that as an epithet, that's a matter of concern. That's a suspect mark in my book. So we'll now go to his mailbag questions. He sent two. He said, I saw Tom Brady was dropping the N-word at the NFL on the NFL broadcast. If this happened in 2014, would he have been fired? Probably. But I mean, he said nicker. So it wasn't quite that way, but it sounded like it to some viewers, because we're so trained on that word being so horrible and odious that even if it's something that sounds like it, people lose their minds. There's been some times where people lost their jobs for just saying something that sounded like it, even if accidentally. So, there would have been much more controversy over it if he had done this in 2014, absolutely. But it's a new day. So like when people go into like, oh, we got to be blackpilling, they're turning against us, there's a vibe shift. But I mean, you still have stuff like this what people are getting away with. So we support Tom Brady and his fight against cancellation. So that is the questions from New England Refugee. We've got some other questions, I think, from Dollar Bill, if we can find it. I'm going to find him. Yes, Dollar Bill has got two questions. He said, did Trump's administration come out ahead by trading Marjorie Taylor Greene to the Democrats in exchange for Zohran Mamdani? Well, I don't think they got Zohran Mamdani because he went back to calling Trump a fascist on the Sunday show. So I don't think that we really exchanged much in there. So that's, I don't think we made much of a trade. And second question, in 2025, the NFL had games played abroad in Brazil, Germany, and the UK. Do you think they will ever play in India? I could see it happening, but the very first game would have to be called off. As most players fall ill with Delhi belly soon after arriving there. I don't know if they'll ever do that because it's a far plane. That's a long flight. And I don't think they have much of a market there. I would see that they would maybe do more like Japan. Like they want like a fully developed country. They don't want to go full third world. I mean, you could say like Brazil, but Brazil, when it comes to sporting events, they have the amenities for that. I think India, they don't really have the amenities for that. And also I don't think that they see it as much of a growing market. China, NBA controls the market in China for professional sports or for Western professional sports, and so maybe they might not encroach on it, but I could see them playing in Japan. I don't think it's a long flight. These players are going to be pissed if they have to fly all day to play a game, and they're not going to play as well as they should, and they're very concerned about that. It's why there will probably never be NFL teams in Europe. They've suggested it, but the plane travel. Teams don't want to do that much plane travel, that much flight time, and that's always going to be a problem for them. The only way that they're going to ever have an NFL Europe is if they have like a single division there that they play primarily amongst themselves, with occasional visits from American teams. But I don't think that they're going to go to India. If they do it in 5 years from now, maybe. I mean, they suggested Jerusalem. I don't think they're going to do NFL Jerusalem because, first off, that would hurt their global brand among Muslims. Second, I don't think Israel can guarantee the security of it. It's just that would be chaos if they did that. I could see them trying to do in Japan, Mexico City, if they haven't already, but they're going to primarily just focus on Europe and the Western Hemisphere for right now. So that's my thoughts on that. And then let's see, we've got. I don't think I got to Hornet. Hornet has two questions. He said, "Did you watch the new Ken Burns documentary on the American Revolution? It is pretty woke, but also well made." I watched the first episode. It begins with talking about the stupid Iroquois Confederacy, and it's like this inspired the Declaration of Independence and our form of government. No, it didn't, but it's otherwise fine. It's mostly the aesthetics. I'm probably going to do an IQ supplement on it. I'm probably going to watch the whole thing and do an IQ. Not this week, as I'll be traveling, but I'm going to try to get it done for next week on it because it's a major cultural thing. It's worth talking about the Ken Burns culture and aesthetic and his portrayal of America. I think it's pretty informative. It doesn't feel stupid. It's it's interesting to watch. So I don't think it's that bad. Ken Burns has a knack for this. He knows how to appeal to the American public without being completely moronic, but there is something concerning about his worldview of America. But what do you expect a Ken Burns documentary for PBS is going to look like? That's that. They aren't as enthralled to the founders. They're all like, they were eager for land speculation. They were wanting to make more money on the land, which I think it is funny that it is not a mythologizing around the founding fathers. I think that's probably really what would people be most upset about, the average person, because they want like, these guys are awesome, everything they did is right. But instead they're getting worked up about minor taxes. They're demanding more land from Indians. And then you're like, this seems pretty negative towards the founding fathers. But more thoughts on that will be in the likely IQ supplement I do on it next week. So be on the lookout for that. Second, are there any good books you would recommend to learn about the history downfall of southern cities like Jackson, Mississippi, or New Orleans? I don't know if there are any good books. I imagine there are some about, there are books about southern locales' problems with integration, school integration, and white flight and stuff. But I don't have any on the top of my head, and I haven't read them. So I don't think that there is the type of book we want. The only book I would say is that American Renaissance did a whole series on the great replacement of these cities, like Jackson, Memphis, Baltimore. And that is a good source to find out because it goes through the whole demographic picture, why they changed, the political history of that. So that is the closest thing I would say is that Amron's Great Replacement series on all these American cities. I would say that that's probably the best source for that. But that's not a book. I think they're trying to make a book about it, produce a book about it, which would be a very good book. So that is Hornet. We now got Sharecrop. Sharecrop said, question on your China IQ supplement. I know boomers proudly believe that if we just bring capitalism to China, they would become a democratic country. I don't know if that's boomers. I think that's more like our political elite. But I don't, we've been very anti-boomer lately, but I don't want to ascribe this to boomers. I don't think any young person believes in that type of foreign policy now, especially after the global war on terror. Do young Americans today believe in projecting American values abroad at all? I can admire the idea of conquering the world with our beliefs, but it's also off-putting. I don't know if it's more average Americans because this foreign policy is really more of a terrain of political elites. Average American, they can get won over. The average American older generation was really taken in by spreading America all over the world. We've been like this since the founding. This is not something new. Henry Clay, a lot of major early American figures were ecstatic about spreading democracy to Latin America, and they wanted to push democracy into Europe. We loved the 1848 revolutions, which I think a lot of right-wingers wouldn't like them, but we thought they were awesome. And we had these radical leaders like Kossuth who was one of the Hungarian revolutionary leaders, come to America and urge for America to intervene into Europe to help out their democratic revolutions. And Americans thought Kossuth was awesome, but then they're like, oh, well, I don't think we're going to intervene, but we're going to support you. Most Americans thought the French Revolution was awesome up until they began slaughtering people. And even then, there was still a lot of support for it. So we've always been into the idea. Americans, maybe not right wingers, have always been taken in by, they're spreading democracy and freedom everywhere. It's even why the majority of Americans backed the Republican side in the Spanish Civil War, because we thought they were on the side of freedom and democracy. Even Catholics, who were the one element that was very skeptical of the Spanish Civil War for obvious reasons, because the Republicans are murdering priests. But even there was only a plurality of Catholics were supporting the Nationalists and Franco. So it's always been that case. I think it's just that young people are more cynical, and probably for good reasons. I don't think it's after global war on terror, because it's like, Zoomers don't really have much memory of the global war on terror. It's only millennials. And, you still had even millennials in the 2010s urging for intervention in Syria. I remember millennials wanting intervention, liberal millennials wanting intervention in Libya, because we thought we turned Libya into another America. Zoomers may be different. And I think it's just that Zoomers are a lot more cynical than millennials, probably in a good reason. And they're less taken in by hope and change like millennials were. And so they're less eager for this stuff. I don't think you could see the type of Zoomer support for foreign interventions like we did among millennials, because millennials backed it in Libya. They had just had fresh memory of Iraq. And then millennials, I had all these people on my Facebook arguing for intervention in Libya who were all libtards, because they thought we could turn Libya into America. All these people got taken in by the Arab Spring, and then they got taken in to believing we could implant democracy in Syria. And even Obama's message for pulling us out of Iraq was that we could focus on building democracy in Afghanistan, which obviously didn't happen. So I would say it's just total boomer, because it's just something that's been within our country, but it's not fully formed, well formed, except among the political elites. But we've always had this cultural sentiment in America of, we want to spread our values around the world. Now, whether we want to do that by military force, that's more of a recent invention, post-World War II thing. Even though sometimes people wanted us to spread military force. I mean, if you guys listen to my podcast on America's relationship with the Middle East, we had all these people there like, we can spread Christianity and democracy there. We need to go into the Middle East. And this is like the 19th century. So we've always had that issue. Americans are, we're an optimistic people. Sometimes sometimes not for the best. And we are taken in by these ideas that seem like a world-changing and a messianic version of America, that we can turn the entire world into America. And Americans really like this idea. I don't know if it's the case with Zoomers, but millennials believed in it. So I don't know if LK Rurick's going to submit his question today, but if not, we've got Dave to round us out. So Dave's got two questions. His first question is the Virgin Suicides and Donnie Darko GenXcore? I have not seen the Virgin Suicide, so I would not know. Dead Poet Society would in some ways be Gen X, very popular among Gen X, but that's also one of these nostalgia films that it's portraying a previous generation, because it's set in the 50s, but it was very popular, or early 60s rather. I think it's pre-68, but I think it's actually early 60s. But Gen Xers really liked it, but that was a past generation. In the same way that American Graffiti and Dazed and Confused were popular films, even though they're among latter generations, even though they're portraying an earlier generation. I'm not sure. I have not seen Virgin Suicides. GenXcore would be Fight Club. Definitely Fight Club, Office Space. Those would absolutely be Gen X core films. But Donnie Darko is an interesting one, because that's midway between Gen X and millennials. That is more of an older millennial core movie. Millennials really liked it, I think, much more than Gen Xers because if I remember correctly, it bombed at the box office, but then it became a cult classic and was really big in the 2000s. And I remember people in my high school really liked that movie. And we were, I'm born in 1990, so that's middle, that's hardcore millennial generation right there. That's not people no one would ever confuse us for being Gen X. But I think Donnie Darko is more of a millennial core movie, even though it was released in the early 2000s or 2000. I'm actually needing to check on this. We're gonna have to fact check. If I remember correctly, it was released in 2001. So millennials are already, the oldest millennials are already 20. And this is a film about teenagers. And if you're in high school in 2001, you would be a millennial. So I would say, but there is a type of Gen X element in there. Jake Gyllenhaal is a Gen Xer. And there's a weirdness about it that I think is maybe more weirder than, it's more like Edward Scissorhands would also be a Gen X core film. But Donnie Darko, of the people who really liked it and were really into it, it was primarily millennial, and it extended even to people who were born in the early 90s. So I would say Donnie Darko on the edge between Gen X and millennial, millennial core. Heathers would be, it has some elements of like Gen X or core films like Heathers and Edward Scissorhands, but I would say it's on a dividing line. But I think that the time was released, if a film is released in the early 2000s and it's directed towards teenagers and the people who were most into it were millennials, I would have to put it as a millennial core film. So Dave's final question, it's a very good one. It's a very important one. Something that we wanted to address, that people need to address. And his question is Clarence Thomas the greatest Black American? You know what? When thinking about all our options, I would say yes. I would declare him the greatest Black American. He was the second Black Supreme Court justice, much better than Thurgood Marshall. Very intelligent. He's been a great figure in American politics and American life and pushing things that we agree with. And I think he earned his spot on the Supreme Court by merit, not by affirmative action, even though it was picked because he was, they were like, we got a Black conservative, but he turned out to be one of the best justices we've had on the Supreme Court. So yes, I would actually say Clarence Thomas. There's a lot of admirable and respectable figures who were Black American. I would say Malcolm X is more of a villain, but there's a lot of admirable facts about him and you can respect him. W.E.B. Du Bois, I find him very interesting, even though I think his ideas were harmful. But I think Clarence Thomas overall, and making a positive impact for America, representing the type of America we want, I would find that with Clarence Thomas, and he reached one of the highest stages of power. So I would absolutely say, yes, Clarence Thomas is the greatest Black American. I would agree with that. So that is it. So, okay, Rourke, missing in action today. Hopefully he shows up for Wednesday. But as a reminder, if you have two really good questions, you can submit them for the mailbag. It might be a written mailbag. It might be a broadcast one, audio version. I'm still debating on that. But if you have, try to keep it to one question for the shorten, because it is the day before Thanksgiving. We want to give everyone the time to enjoy the holiday week. So there's that. We are obviously not going to have a column for Thursday. Enjoy the holiday. Happy Thanksgiving. We will have an IQ supplement for Friday, but that will be our schedule this week. I am not, unlike for July 4th. July 4th, I was like, I'm going to have a shortened schedule. And then I end up doing a full schedule. We just don't have recorded episodes for the regular episode of the mailbag. But we are not going to have a column Thursday. I have an I had an AmCon column published yesterday, so you'll see it on Highly Respected Substack by the time this airs. And then we're going to have a column tomorrow, And so that's the schedule. So that is it for Highly Respected this week. We got more great content coming up, so be on the lookout for that. So until next time, stay respected.